So it's a real honor to introduce Dr. Mihretu Guta. Dr. Guta specializes in metaphysics and the philosophy of mind, including research interests in the philosophy of religion, philosophy of cognitive neuroscience, philosophy of quantum mechanics, and several other areas. He earned his Ph.D. from Durham University in the United Kingdom, working under the supervision of E.J. Lowe and Sophia Gibb. His thesis title was In Defense of the Importance of Substance Ontology for Personal Identity and the Self. He's earned 2 Master of Arts in Philosophy from Biola University, 1 in Philosophy with high honors, 1 in Science and Philosophy with highest honors. He's a Bachelor's in Theology with distinction from Evangelical Theological College in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Dr. Guta has received many accolades and awards for recognition. In particular, the merit-based prestigious Durham Doctoral Student Award for 3 years. After completing his Ph.D., Dr. Guta worked on a postdoctoral fellowship at Durham with the Durham Emergence Project, which was set up in cooperation with physicists and philosophers and was funded by the John Templeton Foundation. Dr. Guta's postdoctoral research focused on the nature of emergence as the phenomena of consciousness taken from the standpoint of metaphysics, philosophy of mind, cognitive neuroscience, and quantum physics. He has numerous publications, Dr. Guta's and presentations. He's presented his papers and public lectures over 70 times. Dr. Guta was his international publications included a special issue of the Journal of Consciousness Studies entitled Insight into the First-Person Perspective of the Self, an Interdisciplinary Approach, which he co-edited with Dr. Gibb. He also has a edited volume entitled Consciousness and the Ontological Properties, published by Routledge. I hope we have this book in our library. We'll soon if we don't. It's a wonderful book. A lot of very interesting articles in here. He's also authored numerous journal articles. I'll hit the titles of a couple of them because they're relevant to the talk today. A forthcoming journal article entitled The Sufficiency of Neuromechanism for Consciousness. Another one entitled Two Natures of the Incarnate Christ, the Bearer Question. Objects, Dispositions, Lockean Properties, and the Person-Making Properties. In progress, he's working on a piece entitled Mirror Neurons, Empathy, Intersubjectivity, and the Second-Person Perspective with Implications for the Problem of Consciousness. He is also working on a book entitled The Metaphysics of Substance and Personhood, a non-theory-laden approach, which he's working with Cambridge University. Currently, Dr. Guta teaches both graduate and undergraduate levels of philosophy at Biola and here at Azusa Pacific University. Please welcome Dr. Guta.
Thank you so very much, Dr. David. And I am so grateful for the opportunity to be here tonight and to present about consciousness. And I absolutely love consciousness, and consciousness is a very interesting phenomenon in the world. And it's one of the most familiar phenomenon, also one of the most mystifying stuff at the same time. And philosophers and neuroscientists have been studying just to answer one fundamental basic question of what consciousness is for the past 60 plus years. And I think the modern conception of consciousness was sparked by French philosopher René Descartes back in the 17th century. And ever since, philosophers have been scrambling, and neuroscientists have been scrambling, and everyone has a vested interest in consciousness, and rightly so. I mean, all of you guys are now conscious, and consciousness is very, very down to earth stuff. But what is it? Can you catch consciousness? Can you really define what it is? It's very difficult to really say what consciousness is by giving a necessary and sufficient condition for what consciousness consists. And so what I would like to do tonight is I will be approaching my lecture in 2 different ways. First, I will be presenting a debate between imaginary Mary and John and what they actually think about whether or not brain actually thinks. And I would like Mary to win and John to lose. And if there are people in here tonight, Mary and John, it has nothing to do with you. Don't come after the presentation to give me hard time. You're awesome, but the imaginary people are going to excite us. So what I will be doing is, first I will start by looking at the neuroscientific dimension of consciousness, and then move you slowly to ontology. So I'm reserving ontology and pushing it to the back burner for now, because ontology allows us to see the real challenge we face when we think about consciousness. Here is the main question that I would like to explore in the first segment of my talk. Does the brain think? So we need to understand the spirit of this question before we actually answer whether brain thinks or not. So various parties have vested interest in this question, and we begin by talking about cognitive scientists. Well, basically, cognitive science is an amalgamation of anthropology, artificial intelligence, computer science and mathematics, linguistics, neuroscience, brain science, philosophy, and psychology. We have also cognitive scientists, neuroscientists, who really do research on the nature of the brain and the neural correlates of the brain itself, whether neuronal activities and neural networks, what kind of role they play in terms of allowing us to have mental life, such as beliefs, desires, and intentions. And cognitive psychologists also study human brain, and metaphysicians like myself and Josh and others, and philosophers of mind. So now you can see that there are many, many people who have vested interest in the brain, and they put their money on brain because brain is essential, very, very important for us to be able to survive and do what we are capable of doing right now. So suppose that John and Mary, imaginary John and Mary, are engaging in a debate now over what constitutes the best answer to the brain question. Okay, how should we answer this question? What's the best answer for this question? So John gives a yes answer from the get-go. He's very sure. He doesn't really kind of, yes, the brain actually is an organ that thinks, okay? And Mary is cautious and she disagrees, but why? Why is the disagreement is bubbling and emerging between John and Mary? Mary thinks that contra surface level appearance, the brain question itself is not actually a single question. So the brain question is, in fact, pregnant with two different questions. So does the brain think? To be able to understand that question, we need to understand the spirit of the question itself. So we can bifurcate the very question itself into two domains. And the first one is domain one, what is brain in the first place? Domain two, what is thinking? So does the brain think? Seems to be a single question at the surface, but it's not. It's like asking a complex question in informal fallacy, saying, have you stopped beating your wife? Or, have you stopped cheating on the exam? How would you answer that question? You shouldn't say yes, nor should you say no. Both answers will actually trap you. So you need to bifurcate, you need to dissect, you have to do some sort of surgery on the question itself. All right? Otherwise, you'll be in trouble. Have you stopped beating your wife? No. Okay, I'm beating currently, so I should go to jail. Have you stopped beating your wife? Yes, you've been beaten at some point. So you're not off the hook yet. So you should never answer that kind of complex question by saying yes or no. So exactly in the same way, this is not an informal fallacy, but the question itself is pregnant with two distinct questions. The surface level does not actually display that. So what is brain? What's thinking? So we need to have some understanding about each, right? So traditionally, if you go historically from Plato to Descartes, domain one has been taken to be the domain of physicality. So brain has been understood to be a physical organ, right? So in fact, Descartes was not ashamed of even denying the relevance of the brain when it comes to the ontology of what it means to be a human person. So brain is not going to establish your personhood for Descartes. It's an organ that's extended in virtue of being part of your entire body in a space, and whatever that's extended in a space is equivalent to some sort of complicated mechanical machine, and it doesn't really contribute to the metaphysical aspect of who you are fundamentally, ontologically speaking. So traditionally speaking, you can go to Plato. Plato himself denied your basic metaphysical nature does not actually depend on your physicality. In fact, you did actually exist before you were even part of the body. So Plato believed in the pre-existence of all of us. OK, domain 1 has been taken to be the domain of physicality pertaining to physical things. By contrast, domain 2 has been taken to be the domain of non-physicality pertaining to non-physical things. For example, thinking is sustained by something that's physical, human brain, but thinking in and of itself taken doesn't seem to be physical. At least I would argue that it's not physical. In modern times, domain 1 and 2 are said to have given rise to two general methods of inquiry. So domain 1 and 2, some people say that the best way to understand, to answer the domain 1 and the domain 2 questions, what is brain, what is thinking, is by employing what they call empirical and non-empirical methods, taken independent of each other on the one hand, or the hybrid of the two methods, integrating the two taken on the other hand. So the way you can really answer what's brain, what's thinking is maybe you can just take empirical and non-empirical approach and apply the two approaches to understand, and come up with the answer for that question. Or, as I've argued in this book, in the introduction and in my own chapter, I think we need to follow kind of some sort of the hybrid model, because the empirical aspect contributes what the non-empirical aspect fails to contribute, and vice versa. So once you have the hybrid approach, you can come up with a possible way of garnering insights from both sides, and then I think the result would be much more preferable. Okay? John's and Mary's debate now takes a complicated form. I think you guys, you're absolutely welcome to identify yourself with either Mary or John. That's you're right. So really going to get complicated now. The question now becomes, does progress in domain 1 guarantee progress in domain 2? Or does progress in domain 2 guarantee progress in domain 1? This is very, very important to understand. For example, the more I know about how brain works, the inner workings of brain, the properties of neurons, and electrical and chemical properties of human brain, and then important genes and proteins in our brain that really are super important for the healthy functioning of human brain, would that be enough for me to have insights into what thinking is? Okay, I can have a massive knowledge of how brain works. Am I now in a position to know what thinking is? All right? Flip that question around and say, okay, I have an excellent understanding of what thinking is. Would that shed any light on my understanding of a physical brain itself? So how should we go about thinking about this issue? So put differently, we can say, does knowledge of the nature of the brain result in our knowledge of the nature of thinking, or cognition? Or is it the case that our knowledge of the nature of thinking results in our knowledge of the brain? This is very, very important to keep in your mind to really follow my argument. So John believes that deep knowledge of the brain provides us with deep knowledge of the nature of thinking, or cognition. I think this is the dominant, actually, answer by neuroscientists, cognitive scientists, cognitive psychologists, and all those people who have vested interest in human brain. They say that all we have to do, all that it takes on our part, is really to have an exhaustive understanding of the physical inner working of human brain, and then we're set to go. Okay? John actually represents the dominant position that currently takes, I don't know, huge influence. Okay, Mary disagrees, right? But why? Mary believes that before giving the benefit of doubt to John's position being a plausible one, some facts about the brain must be spelled out and examined to see if they shed any significant light on what the nature of thinking is, right? Mary is always super critical, slow down, hold your horses, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm not as excited as you are. Let's first understand what this brain stuff is all about. Okay, I'm going to talk about brain now a little bit, okay? I hope I shouldn't bore you talking about the biological aspect of human brain, but I have to do that in order to kind of facilitate and pave the way. So, okay, here is the brain. Human brain is said to be the complex system and organ in the known universe. You cannot even bring black hole nowhere near to human brain. It is absolute black hole in its own right. So there is a black hole right there inside the skull. It weighs 3 pounds. And brain is part of the nervous system. The central nervous system consists of your brain and the spinal cord. The spinal cord is very, very important because all messages that trickle down from your brain, they get distributed to the rest of your body through the facilitation of spinal cord. So peripheral nervous system connects the nervous system to muscles and sense organs. Okay? Peripheral nervous system is subdivided into a somatic nervous system, which is in charge of voluntary control of the skeleton. And automatic nervous system also is responsible to be in charge of homeostasis. That is a kind of the regulation of internal bodily conditions and temperature, for instance, or even unconscious control of such as breathing and digestion and internal temperature, heart rate, and the like. All of these things are physiological activities that we cannot really control. I cannot at will stop my heart. I cannot tell my heart to speed up or slow down. I have no control over that. All right? So brain is composed of specialized cells. These cells are implicated in cognition. Now, you see the subsequent discussion is going to get very interesting and very complicated as well in its own right. So neurons are exactly what we are after. So we want to understand the properties of neurons because they play the magic for us. So what kinds of cells are these neurons? It's estimated that a normal human brain actually contains 100 billion neurons right now, each one of you. A healthy functioning human brain has got at the least, this is not even like a precise number, at the least 100 billion neurons. Each neuron actually makes at the least 10,000 connections with its neighboring neuron. Guess what? The total connection synapses right now inside your brain, guess what? Don't fall off your chairs. 100 trillion connections at the least. This is what we're up against. The connections only, they exceed 100 trillion connections. So there are different types of neurons in our brain. Motor neurons, they carry signals from nervous system to muscles, resulting in bodily movement, for instance. Messages have to come from brain, as you all know, I hope. Sensory neurons carry signals from sensory system to the central nervous system, where it gets translated and comes back in the form of a message as well, so that you can carry out different activities. Interneurons connect neurons inside the central nervous system with each other, facilitating communication between them. Neurons have a cell body containing a nucleus, and leading to the cell body are numerous structures called dendrites, and they carry actually passive electric current. They send it to the cell body and carry in the form of, as I've said, passive electrical signal to the cell body. But what happens after that is, leading away from the cell body, there are electrical signals that have to be sent out from the cell body outward. These are facilitated by a very kind of cable-like structure called axon, and it's covered by myelin sheath in order to facilitate electrical signals in the form of the neuron's response to the input delivered by its dendrites. So neuronal signals take electrical form. Dendrites carry, as I've said, passive electrical signals, and axions carry active electrical impulses known as action potential. And action potentials are constituted by waves of movement of positively charged ions of sodium and potassium into and out of the neurons. So neurons also communicate with other neurons by chemical means. The point at the axonal branches of fibers meet the dendrites of another neurons. In between, we have what we call synapse. And there, a small gap between the axonal branches and the dendrites is called synaptic cleft. So neurons' action potential jump over synaptic cleft through the facilitation of chemicals called neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters pour into that cleft, and then signals jump from one end to another end. The receptors end from. Okay, neurons are organized into circuits that are in turn grouped into higher level units. So I'm only talking about this not with the assumption that you guys don't know, but I just want to link it up, our knowledge of how the brain works, even in a crude way that I'm presenting it now. How is it connected to what we call thinking? So it really paints that background. So I'll be speeding up this part to just get into the most interesting part. So different regions of the brain structures play distinct yet closely interrelated and interdependent roles. For example, the cerebral cortex is divided into 4 areas or lobes, each with relatively distinct functions. For example, if you take the frontal lobe is implicated with planning, among other things, reasoning, and so forth. And we have parietal lobe that's responsible to facilitate sensations, among other things, or occipital lobe, right in the back of your brain, facilitates visual processing or vision in general. Temporal lobes facilitate the storage of memory, visual memories, and auditory processing, among other things. So kind of to give you some interesting picture so that I wouldn't really regret later on, if I don't show you something about the brain. So here we have frontal lobe right there. And we have parietal lobe right there, this region, and occipital lobe. Your vision is processed right here, and photons hit your retina, and they, through the facilitation of optic nerve, they have to be translated into electrical signal before they reach actually here, because brain only works with electrical signals rather than non-electrical signals. And we have cerebellum right here, very much important, a structure for motor, coordination, among other things. And in fact, about 60 billion neurons are congregated here for some magical reason. I don't understand why. And temporal lobe is for auditory related things, among other things. And the spinal cord right there, as you can see, is very, very important structure as well. So there are various regions of the human brain here. But I just want to point only one thing, and I'll stop talking about this so much. Look here. This is a Broca area. It's responsible for language production. And right there, Wernicke's area is for language perception. So these are 2 different spatially related places. They are not spatially related. In other words, they are separated space-wise. There is a kind of relative distance between them. So in some situations, you can perceive what a person says. You cannot produce the language itself. You might produce language, but you do not have any idea what you're actually talking about. Sometimes it's weird. When it malfunctions, it really kind of flips around the role itself. So now, brain imaging and scanning methods are also very much discussed in the literature whenever we talk about thinking and mental states in general. So some of the scanning techniques, as you all know, I'm pretty sure EEG, electroencephalograph, it has got good temporal resolution, but not spatial resolution. We have what we call PET scan and MRI, fMRI, and TMS. It's not a scanning technique. This one is just you can mechanically play with different regions of the brain and make a person do some activity against that person's will. Okay? And then scanning methods apply to brain structures, MRI, CT scan, SPECT, and all of those things are very, very important. Okay. Based on such information, the scanning techniques, especially functional magnetic resonance imaging, can be used to correlate. While a person is engaged in some kind of activity, neuroscientists can scan the person's brain at the same time and see what's happening in that person's brain. So if you go back to 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, it was horrible. You have to die before people know what has happened to you, because they can't know anything while you're still alive. There were scanning machines. Or there were techniques called lobotomy, like where you can literally like drill a human brain while that person is alive, you know, and see what happens. Oh my goodness, I can't really, it must have been horrible. But now, thank God, I mean, you can just walk in and they shove you, you know, through this scanning machine, you know, through magnetic field, whoop, you know, nothing, you know, it's just fun. I mean, it's fun right now. I think, but it wasn't like that before. Okay, so now we can see what's happening in a human brain while a person is alive. But what information can we retrieve from that? Can we see a person's belief, desire, planning, regrets? What do you think brain scanning machines are capable of showing us about what's happening in a human brain? So Mary now disagrees, and John is super enthusiastic about that, and we can really correlate and so forth, but I'll bring some things now. Mary disagrees. She claims that the hitherto information we know about the brain and the like, it really says little about what thinking is. It doesn't really show us anything. It doesn't really tell us much important information about what thinking is. You can know as much as you like about how a physical human brain works, but still the question of what thinking is still there, unanswered. What unifies your experiences, for example? Now, right now, you do not experience this lecture hall distinctly. You experience everything in your visual field unified. You can't experience me and then experience Josh and experience the whiteboard and the podium. Everything is unified in some sense in your visual field. So everything is just appears in unity. So what's unifying that? You might say brain is contributing to that. Yes. If brain malfunctions, you cannot have a unified experience. So explanatory gap problem now emerged. How does subjective experience arise from brain activities? Sensation of pain, for example. Now, Mary is very careful because all of these issues are left unanswered by our exhaustive knowledge of human brain. How about this? What consciousness is hasn't been answered yet, even if we do have an exhaustive knowledge of how human brain works. What is it? So what is consciousness is, as I call it, like the nature question, and I go in depth in discussing this issue in my chapter here. The nature question, what is it? Here, where consciousness came from is the origin question right there. And how is it connected to the entity we call brain? That's the relation question. We want to know how consciousness related to a physical human brain. And what does the brain activity has to do with consciousness? That's kind of a correlation question right there. So this is exactly where problems start emerging all over the place. And the debate rages, and the controversy, in fact, goes through the roof now. Because there are different kinds of approaches that neuroscientists and philosophers take in answering these questions. And sometimes neuroscientists think they are done with this and with that because they answered this and that. It's a confusion. So answering the relation question and the correlation question sometimes, in fact, in most cases, has nothing to do with answering the origin question or the nature question. In fact, that's exactly my argument here. It doesn't matter how many experiments you've been doing for the past how many years, you haven't still succeeded in answering the nature question and the origin question. And actually, what makes the nature question and the origin question is the fact that they are straightforward metaphysical questions. In fact, this could also be metaphysical. That could also be metaphysical. But these two are the relation question and the correlation question. They can be handled through different neuroscientific experiments. At the least, you can get some good epistemic insight into what the kind of relationship is that exists between brain and consciousness, and the correlation question as well. So Mary is now, she's really saying we have a lot on our table. I don't think we should be super excited yet. I think we should take things very, very slowly. Okay, so we have also asymmetry between first-person perspective, which is grounded in subjective experience, and third-person perspective, which is grounded in intersubjective collaboration or cooperation. So when you think about consciousness, the first thing that comes to your mind is subjectivity, what it is like to be in such and such a state, for example, as so many people have argued over the years. A dog can be conscious in a rudimentary sense, but I don't think a dog can be conscious in a way that we are conscious, because we do have a first-person perspective, we do have reflexivity, we reflect on our own thinking, we engage in second-order reflection. In other words, I can think about myself. I can say, how terrible you are, Guta. How can you afford to do this and that? You know? Who do you think you are? I can actually, go home and close my bedroom, whatever, stand in front of the mirror. Who do you think you are now? I can talk to myself, and I have self-concept. I don't think other animals, non-human animals, can engage in a second-order reflection about first-order issues. A dog is conscious of his environment, but not conscious of the fact that the dog is dog, or Fido is Fido. How good I am, really, I'm better than so many dogs in Australia, for example. Now no one is like me, and yeah, I think this is great. My owner is taking a good care of me. And when was the last time that your dog said to you, don't walk me today, leave me alone, I'm concerned about US economy? When was the last time? Or I'm depressed, just leave me alone. I'm just thinking about life, about my cousin, nieces, and nephews. I don't know. There's nothing in the animal world that really drives them to behave in that way, because their consciousness is a kind of rudimentary level consciousness. So we do engage in first-person perspective. We do engage in third-person perspective as well. So there is asymmetry between the two perspectives, and consciousness is grounded here, not here. Okay. So what's thinking? Now, basic to our question, what's thinking? Okay, what is it now? Now, this is the second segment. Okay, we've talked about it, the inadequacy of only having an exhaustive brain knowledge to answer so many questions that are central. So what is thinking now? We can simply kind of define it as a mental process consisting of such things as beliefs, desires, and intentional states. Thinking leads to thoughts, okay, and which take actually different form. But what are thoughts? They are concepts. Now, okay, thinking is cognition, it's a mental state, and you can also say that thinking is a capacity that allows you to entertain various kinds of mental states as well. So that leaves us what we call, it really brings us to the most important aspect of what we've been talking about. So it's ontology. Ontology is the study of being or existence and entities of different kinds. So thinking presupposes a thinker. How many of you have taken Intro to Philosophy at APU? Yes. How many of you are big fans of Mr. Descartes? Yes. Mr. Descartes tried to engage in an exercise called methodic skepticism, and he tried to deny and doubt everything, his body, his environment, every single thing else, every single thing. And then he hit the dead end, and he was not able to doubt his own existence. And he said, I think, therefore I am. So, well, for Descartes at least, from his skeptical exercises, a thinker takes a central part. There can't be a thinking without a thinker. So the two go together. Where you can only talk about a thinker, thinking where there is a thinker. You can also talk about consciousness where there is a conscious human being in our context. So you cannot really talk about like my consciousness is hovering over me. How beautiful it is. It's cute. I mean, it's just like Chick-fil-A sandwich. Wonderful. I mean, you can't say that. I mean, you are essential to consciousness in the sense that I can only understand and make sense of consciousness by making reference to you as a conscious human being. Okay? Now, so the two are inextricably linked. But what kind of being is a thinker now? Cartesian substance dualism would say, well, immaterial substance, whereas the body is a material substance, but you are essentially that right here. Okay, non-Cartesian substance dualists would say that, well, the self or a thinker is an embodied being, but neither identical with the body as a whole, nor with the part of the body such as the brain. Now you can see, according to non-Cartesian substance dualists, the brain actually does not play a central metaphysical role in grounding your own identity, metaphysical identity. Your metaphysical identity is not grounded in the brain. Metaphysical identity is grounded in the self, the thinker. So you have a different identities, identity conditions or persistence conditions that you can use in order to show that you're distinct from the self and from what it actually embodies, whether a part of the body, such as the brain, or the body as a whole. Okay, so property dualists would say that a thinker is a purely physical substance and can entertain two distinct properties. A physical property and a mental property. So type identity physicalists would say a thinker is right here. Mental properties are physical properties. There's only one thinker and one substance, one property. So right here, mental properties are exactly identical in a kind of metaphysical sense to physical properties. So there is no distinction according to type identity physicalism, hence the name. So property dualism, mental properties are not identical to physical substance, but the bearer is a single human entity. Functionalism is neutral, doesn't really care about the nature of properties, physical or otherwise. What would it take to show if brain thinks? This is exactly where I would like to put as a challenge to my neuroscience friends and cognitive scientists or cognitive psychologists to answer, and in fact philosophers as well to answer. What would it take to show if brain thinks? It would take, in my view, the neurons have to think. That's it. So neurons have to be shown to have the property of consciousness. So individually or corporately, neurons are the nerve cells that should be shown to have such a property. But can nerve cells think? How are we going to showing that? So this is the major stuff that we need to be concerned about. What's happening right now? A lot is happening currently in the literature. So in order to show that the gap is narrowing down between human beings and other non-human gadgets that we are creating, if you take AI, artificial intelligence, it comes in two different forms: weak artificial intelligence and a strong artificial intelligence. A strong artificial intelligence actually says that there is no distinction between human beings and gadgets. All we have to do is prove that by making complicated devices that can really execute and carry out things at not only a faster speed than human beings, but capable of generating their own thoughts and consciousness and so on. And we have machine learning. There are algorithms, for example. You can use a set of rules that you can put in place as you program a computer, and a computer should follow those algorithms in order to execute different kinds of tasks. And robotic technologies also use that, the same kind of method. Human-machine interface is, in fact, planting chip in your brain, for instance, to upgrade the memory capacity of your brain or different kinds of things. So extended mind theory is extending information from your brain out into gadgets. How many of you now memorized the phone numbers that you used to memorize before you got this smartphone? Where is the information right now? It's not inside your brain. You're vacating your brain, actually. People are making their brains empty these days because everything is out on the gadgets. So you want the gadgets to remember. You do not want to remember yourself. You do not want to kind of take that hard a task of memorizing everything. No, I have 20 phone numbers. It's right there. I can just click. It's right there. So we used to remember that. So extended theory is a theory that says that human brain is actually becoming not super central as it used to be because we can actually use all these gadgets in order to do that. Okay. Now, later on, I want you guys to ask me, Josh and myself, whether gadgets can really excel us or they can show whether we are relevant over time and so forth. I have no confidence whatsoever, no matter how complicated these gadgets are. They speak more about us than them, because we are the ones, we are people who are creating that. So what would it take on our part in order to be able for us to create such devices as opposed to seeing the matter the other way around? Okay. So is mind nothing but a computational device? Well, according to so many cognitive neuroscientists, yes. Can machine think? There is a possibility. There is optimism out there. That's exactly what people are trying to prove. Once they prove that, which I highly doubt that they will, so we are not relevant. So in fact, I have read recently on a literature that a person was arguing that machines in the future will make us be their pets. Not that we can use machines. They can hire us as their pets. Right? So they can control us and something like that. So if we could do that, then our relevance go down. But always there's an elementary fallacy right here. Who is making these computers and gadgets superbly complicated? Who is making them? This is the outcome of our thinking, our capacity, right? But it tells more about us than them. So this is directly related to what we believe actually as even Christians. And so the relevance of humanity and the centrality of humanity is in fact fading away for so many people because of this. So are we going to see machine zombies, for example? So the zombies that I'm talking about, they are not the cute zombies that you guys watch in movies, but these are philosophical zombies. Philosophical zombies, for example, you have no way of proving that I am not zombie right now. The only thing that you think I'm a human being is I'm talking like you and I look like you, blah, 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 blah. What if I do not have any consciousness right now? Consciousness minus me is going to be called philosophical zombie. A person who's sitting next to you might be a zombie. That's a very scary thought. But you have no way of knowing that because the person is talking like you, it looks like you, there's nothing. But that person is devoid of consciousness. So it is possible, according to some philosophers, to really show that zombies are maybe metaphysically possible. In other words, there's a possible world whereby beings like can exist, but who are zombies without consciousness. And then they can walk among us, but then we have no way of knowing that because they can say, I'm going to APU, I'm taking Intro to Philosophy with Guta. It's great. So how can you say that that person is a zombie? You're taking a class with a zombie. So it's just weird stuff. So there's no way to know that. Only God help us from this very scary entities. Okay, so what did I accomplish in my talk? I think what I have shown you is that, generally speaking, without getting all kind of very interesting issues that philosophers talk about, I've shown you generally, I've painted like exhaustive knowledge about human brain is not a guarantee to really help us understand what thinking is. So thinking exists in a different domain, in a different kind of category compared to a physical organ itself. So the main challenge of settling the question of consciousness resides in the origin question. Where does it come from? So the dominant answer is nervous system, and nervous system, I don't think, answers that question, because no matter how complex brain you have, complexity does not play a causal role in bringing about a property like consciousness. So in closing, in my chapter in this book that I have edited, I have argued for what I call a non-causal spontaneous emergence of consciousness, phenomenal consciousness. I denied a physical causation, causal source for phenomenal consciousness. I have offered a theory according to which there could be things in the natural world that can happen without being caused, at least in a way we understand causation. So spontaneous occurrences. There are many in physics, for example, atomic radium decay, for instance, human agency, the power to will, itself is not caused. So anyway, maybe I think we can talk about a lot during the Q&A, and I have only 7 minutes to wrap up my talk. I hope it made sense to you. If not, get ready to slaughter me during the Q&A time, okay? I hope it made sense for all of you.
Hello, Professor Guta. My name is Kenny. Several weeks ago, I sneezed in my math class, and then one of my friends said, "Bless you." And then we just came to this discussion about, oh, what if I sneeze and you aren't there to bless me? And then she said, oh, but I'll create a machine that blesses you. So my question is, okay, so can a machine engage in a spiritual activity such as worship? Would it have any spiritual significance? Because I don't know how do I, because human brains merely machines, then a machine can do what we can do, right? So.
Okay, I would like to give you, okay, good. So one of the recurrent trend in artificial intelligence, machine learning community and among scientists is that if we write up an algorithm that imitates what we do, human beings, biologically and naturally and organically, then that means the same thing as what we do. So they are doing out of their own will what we do out of our own will. But I think everything goes back to the algorithm that you write. You actually came up with an algorithm to make the machine carry out that kind of task. But actually, there is no evidence whatsoever to say that a machine somehow is a being of some sort and conscious of what it is doing. Everything is blind to these machines. They are not conscious of any of the process that they engage in because they are engaging it because you put them together to engage in that kind of process. So there is no shred of evidence other than anthropomorphizing and personifying these machines, giving them an attribute of human attribute to machines and think that they are doing that on their own. First of all, the other problem with such theories is that first, they have to do their ontology before they just use easily. Oh, look, this is here is a conscious machine. But what is consciousness? What is a being? What's an entity? How would you cash that out? They don't. They just say a machine is doing. Well, wait a minute. What does it mean? There's no account of that. So if you could show me, without any algorithm, if a computer says to me tomorrow morning, don't operate on me, and I am so concerned about the state of the world's economy, and there is no algorithm of that sort, and I would say that angelic beings or demon-like beings possessed my computer. So you need to come up with zero contribution on your part. That computers can come up with a novel spontaneous, common sense-based, intuitive, that kind of thing. That's how we function. That's how we function, we human beings. Algorithmic-based activity is that's what you've set up for that machine to execute. And it executes everything in a binary logic, black and white, 1 and 2. That's it. No turning left, no turning. There is no mercy on these gadgets. They only operate in the way they are being put together to operate. So therefore, I am not only skeptical of that, I do not really think there is no evidence. I actually don't believe that we have capability to do that. But that shouldn't come up across as if I'm dogmatic, but that's the way it is. And I would like to see first the metaphysical work being done. Yeah.
Well, you're the humble Mary. You're the skeptic, right, in this. Right? So you're not being dogmatic. You're saying, give me evidence, right? Yes. I just want to echo this. I thought your distinction between the origin question and the nature question is very important. So we can distinguish between where the consciousness is coming from versus what is its nature. And when you think about the nature of things, one of the things that philosophers of mind draw attention to are properties of consciousness itself. And so one of the properties in somebody who's saying, bless you, when you're sneezing, maybe there's two properties. There's a property of love. And in that property of love, there's a feeling to it, right? A sense, a first-person sense. And then there's also an intentional property. And so one of the things that people wonder about is the property of feeling and is the property of intention reducible purely to the kind of mechanistic properties of machines? Or if you get a machine to say, I bless you, is the machine merely acting like it's feeling and intending? And that's an important distinction. And this is why Mihretu is pointing this out, that just because you can get something that even acts just like a human being who's blessing you doesn't thereby follow. It's a further question whether it actually is having that feeling. I think we all understand that intuitively, but sometimes these distinctions get lost. That's why I think it's very helpful to make these distinctions. Yes, it's a great question.
So it's been a minute since I've been in a philosophy class, so bear with me if I misremember things. But what I remember in the classics, Plato and Aristotle, is that they attribute a lot of the ability to reason and rationalize and think to the soul as opposed to the brain. And from your talk today, I was getting that a lot of researchers today would think that those abilities to rationalize, reason, think, and contemplate are attributed to the brain as opposed to the soul. So one question I would ask you is, where historically was this shift in attributing those abilities to the brain as opposed to the soul? And then a second question I'd ask of you is, do you believe in kind of a split between brain and soul, or do you view them acting in tandem or acting mutually with each other?
Wonderful, wonderful question. I think you have hit the nail on its head. Absolutely wonderful. Do you want to answer, or you want me to go first? Okay. I think this divorce between the role of the brain, the role of the soul as being the center of rationality and the center of mental properties has been hijacked during the scientific revolution in 17th century. And prior to that, I think it's fair to say that, except some ancient physicalists, and for the most part, people really have believed in the soul, in the centrality of the soul, and the soul being the center of your all mental properties and rationality and cognitive properties, cognitive faculties, for example. If you take this issue all the way back to Aristotle, to his De Anima, where he actually introduces his theory on perception and all kinds of mental faculties. But during the 17th century, what happened was people really protested against the role of the church and the role of tradition and the role of Christian worldview in general, and supernaturalism in general. So they said, we want to free ourselves from this domination and trap, and we have been caged in this stuff. So we need to understand things through naturalistic means and so forth. Remember that Newton contributed a lot. Newton was a scientist who was himself a very deeply committed Christian, but he introduced that the universe that we live in operates through deterministic laws. So determinism is at the center of everything. So it seems like for so many people, Newtonian, deterministic, mechanical physics give a sort of confidence to assert that, okay, that's the way to go. And this soul stuff, invisible, intangible, spooky stuff, is only for religious people. They can have it in their churches, but not in a scientific domain. Second, it is extreme form of protest against Descartes. Except me. I don't know how many people love Descartes. I don't know. Descartes is my guy. I do think no one has shown him to be wrong, even though many people think that he is dead wrong. So here I stand by myself defending the 17th century philosopher Descartes. So Descartes said there are two separate independent substances, material such as your body, immaterial such as the soul. The material body is not the seat of any of your mental properties, including rationality and everything else. Everything is being done by the soul, immaterial substance. But they are contingently related. Contingently, they work together in tandem insofar as you're alive, you're embodied being. But you do not actually need your body necessarily to continue in existence. So it's a protest against Descartes and also the influence of scientific revolution that really introduced a very serious divorce between these two. And then there are many, many different things that can be said after that, but these are the two major ones that I can think of.
That's good. The only thing I want to add is just I think the sort of increased understanding of the brain and sort of seeing how we can explain the various episodes of consciousness in terms of neurons firing and finding that correlation. Of course, this does bring us back to that deeper question, which distinguishes correlation from nature. And one way I like to sort of think about this or illustrate this distinction is when my wife is playing a beautiful song on the piano, and she does play very beautiful songs, and she's singing, and I'm hearing this, and I'm having this experience of the quality of the music. There's a correlation there between what I'm hearing and the physical keys being played. But what I'm hearing is not the same thing as the physical keys being played. There's an ontological distinction there, even though there's a correlation. And if it turns out that every single time I hear anything, there's some kind of physical vibration that correlates with the experience of my hearing, it still wouldn't follow logically that that physical vibration is the same thing as the feeling of the hearing. And in fact, I actually think that if you pay attention to the properties involved in vibration and compare them in your own mind to the property involved in sensing and experience, you can actually see a distinction between those properties in the same way that you can detect within yourself the difference between being happy and sad. I mean, it's not like you have to check your brain first to see whether you're happy or whether you're sad. You just use your mind and you see, my kids, they say, I'm hungry. Well, how do you know that? I'll ask them that. How do you know you're hungry? Well, we don't have to check their brain, right? They can just see this distinction directly and in a basic way. And I think we actually have this power to see directly and in a basic way. And it's this power which is actually at the root of this inquiry into seeing the nature of your own consciousness. But you have to actually use that power and make these distinctions. I mean, one thing that I think gets lost sometimes is these distinctions, and sometimes we have a tendency to analyze one phenomenon in terms of another phenomenon that we're studying closely. So, for example, the Pythagoreans who studied numbers closely, from which we get the Pythagorean theorem, they had this theory of analyzing things in terms of numbers. Numbers are the most fundamental pieces of reality. And there's sort of a tendency, I think, these days to sort of analyze things in terms of patterns of shape in their motion or equations or systems, because these are the things that we're studying. But we want to be careful to be this, the Mary who's asking this further question. So it's a great question. Thank you.
Hi. So thank you very much for your talk so far. It's been very interesting. But I had a question. You mentioned, zombies, right? And I was wondering so two things. One, if it's possible for there to be a human zombie, like naturally born and everything, but have no consciousness. And B, would you be able to tell? Or two, would you be able to tell?
So just to clarify, the first question, the idea is that you have a complete duplicate, let's say, of this body, atom for atom, and then is it possible for that complete duplicate to then not be conscious and just to be a zombie? Okay. My view is that this is logically possible, but it may not be physically possible given the contingent laws. So we have to make that distinction. Although all you need is logical possibility to show that there's a distinction between the consciousness and the physicality. Because if you have identity of consciousness and physicality, then by this law of identity, it wouldn't be possible for them to come apart. As far as how you would know, now I have to say it depends on if you're the person. Okay, so like I know that I'm not a zombie, but it's a further question. Now, how do you know that I'm not a zombie? Right? That's a deeper question. And my view is you have a kind of inference to the best explanation, but their argument, it gets complicated. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Go ahead.
I think it's very, very interesting. And so you can talk about metaphysical possibility. For instance, there is a possible world where such things are possible given different sets of laws in that possible world. But given the world that we are born into and given the contingent sets of laws that operate in our world, such things are not possible. At the least, we have never come across any instance of such things. So it's highly unlikely to really kind of establish that. But there's a philosopher by the name David Chalmers. He has written a whole lot on whether zombies are possible or not. And he thinks that they could be metaphysically possible, even if they are not. Even like he sometimes toys with the idea that they could be physically possible. You're going to Walmart and a person who's walking nearby you might be a zombie, but can say still hello. How are you doing? Yeah, I'm doing okay. But then there's no way for you to know that that person is not a zombie. So I think these are very, very difficult things, but fun things to think about. But there is no need for anyone to be freaked out here. So you guys are not zombies. So, yeah.
I just want to add one more thing on the knowledge. I mean, I think it's important to understand that you have like these powers inside to know things. And you have to sort of actually use these powers. And I think that one of the things that sort of gets lost when we're trying to think about whether some object out there, like a computer, could be conscious, is that, well, we're not that computer, and so we're like speculating, right, of what it could be. And we almost like lose sight in our speculation of things outside of us, of what we can know from within us. And I think this is really oftentimes missed because we have these sort of five senses that we're using, our eyes and our hearing. But what about the sense by which we can see immediately our own thoughts and feelings? And I think that sense is vitally important to use in this inquiry. And if we put that to the side, maybe we have to say there's no way of knowing. But if we use that sense, then I think we can make some progress. But we have to do the work of using the sense and comparing in our own minds the different properties to see, what could be. So yeah, sure.
Oliver, you got a question? Or should I hit the student? Okay. I'm sorry. Can you raise your hands again? Okay.
I think there was something there too.
Okay. Well, you
Okay, so is there any other way to distinguish zombie and humans with, I know you said with the mental process of beliefs, desire, and intentional states, and I see you guys kind of like using that as framework, but I'm thinking too, like when we're dreaming, what is all of that, what's happening with that? So when it's like kind of taking all of reality, what we're still thinking when we're awake, but it kind of creates its own. So I just want to see what you guys think about that separation.
I love that question. So I've had dreams where I knew I was dreaming. I sort of figured out how to find out if I'm dreaming. I noticed that when I'm awake, I never have a question about when I'm awake. So sometimes I'll have a question, am I awake? And then I know I'm dreaming. Yeah. So so this is how I know that I'm dreaming. And I've had this dream. Shows kind of how much of a nerd I am, but I've had this recurring dream about consciousness. And I'll be looking at the mountains. I had one maybe a few months ago. I was like looking at the mountains, and I knew I was dreaming. And I'm looking at those mountains, and I thought, there's no mountains there, but there's something. Because I can make distinctions between that peak and that peak, and they're not the same. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, whatever that is, it's not neurons in my brain, because they don't have those shapes, those exact qualities. Now, maybe there's correlations there. And I've literally had this dream, and so that's why I love this question, because it does concretize this question about the nature of consciousness. You know the experience of a dream, and you know that whatever it is that you're experiencing, it's something. right? It's something, and you're aware of it, even while you're not aware of the details of the neurons firing in your brain. And so this is a clue into, I think, the kind of being you are, especially if you just think about this principle of identity. If A is B, then whatever's true of A is true of B. So if the neurons firing in your brain literally are the experiences you're having in your dream, then it would be true by being aware of the experience of the dream that you are directly and immediately aware of the neurons firing in your brain. That follows by that rule of identity. But if you're not, in fact, aware of the neurons firing in your brain while you're aware of the experience in the dream, it follows by this principle of identity that they're not the same. And you've got an argument.
This is a fascinating point, just to add a little bit on the asymmetry of between the first person and second person, third person perspective. And I can introspect my own mental life. So the fact that right now I know what's crooks in my mind right now, in addition to the presentation that I'm making. But I have no idea which region in my brain is lighting up, where oxygen flow is increasing, and I have zero access to my physical brain and it's out working. But I can introspect a host of other mental aspect of what's happening in my mind. So, which means we are not even identical to our physical organ in terms of being the owner of those properties, because the asymmetry itself speaks a lot about the distinction that exists between us and what embodies us in some sense.
Hello. So you talked a little bit about technologies like artificial intelligence and their relation to human consciousness. Many researchers of these technologies have been concerned that these technologies will alter the state of human consciousness and therefore what it means to be human, since the concern of these technologies arise from the potential to alter the physical brain through their hybridization of the technology. So what do you have to say about these concerns, and can human consciousness be compromised with these technologies?
You want to answer that? Okay, so here's what I can say. If you take the machine-human interface, yes, they will. Because if someone is planting a chip in your brain in order to enhance the capacity of your memory and so on, and yes, it interferes with the physiological processes of your brain. And but if you're talking about only artificial intelligence or machine learning, which is not related to you or doesn't engage you in a human-machine interface, I don't think how it would alter our consciousness. But if people are really playing with our brain, which is on the offer, what's on the table, people are trying to prove that if you have this chip and so on, and if we plant something in your body, then you can get such and such benefits. In that sense, yes, it will alter the state of your consciousness, but it wouldn't really touch on any of the issues that I've talked so far. It's not going to be an answer for the difficulties that I have pointed out. It only means that people are really playing with your, physical brain. In fact, transcranial magnetic stimulation method is exactly all about that. And neuroscientists can make you fall asleep and make you smile. Even if you don't want to smile, they can go to the part of your brain, tweak a little bit those population of neurons. You go like, I do not want to smile, but I find myself smiling because I am making you to smile. So you can do that, but there are other different ways. They can make you be unconscious by giving you drugs, different kinds of drugs, and so on. But these are very uninteresting things in order to answer the metaphysical questions that we are interested in. They say nothing about those. They would do nothing to answer those things. So my issue for those people who are getting so animated about this machine learning stuff is to really be careful of not to encroach on a territory where they have nothing to say, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would probably be doing the same thing at this moment if I try to give you an ethical solution to this great question. But you triggered this thought, which is that, my one thought was sort of an obvious thought, which is whatever technology we have, let's use it for good, right? But then that sort of triggered this other problem related to how you get consciousness from pure non-consciousness. And it's related to how you get value from non-value, or how you get goodness from purely the materials of non-goodness. Now, there are different theories about this. Some people will try to reduce or analyze value in terms of rationality. But in my mind, these theories, at best, just kick back the problem into another form. And so the deep problem is to understand at the foundation of things, how you can get the kinds of things that can produce beings like us, who could even wonder about how to use technologies for good, right? I mean, that's a very familiar thing, but just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's not deeply special and significant in terms of its implications. And I think it is, because I think there is this deep problem of generating the materials that could produce beings that can think, feel, and have value, and have these questions.
So I want to push back on what would count as an answer. So I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Her. So let's imagine, I don't know if you guys have seen that movie. So let's imagine we develop these technologies, and I'm interacting with my computer, and it's developing, and it seems to have free will, and as much as I think this gentleman in front of me is not a zombie, all the reasons I have for assuming he's having self-conscious experience, I equally have with this. Okay. Wouldn't that go some way to answering the origin problem? And if not, I mean, it seems like to me it's relevant, right? Like if that happened, then it does seem to me that I have to be, Cartesian dualism is out the window. That in fact consciousness does come from physical systems. Once they get to a certain complexity, you get emergence of, but I'm hearing, Dr. Guta, that you think that's just a category mistake, that somehow, even if I saw that, and even if I said, yeah, it's this complexity, and all of a sudden, wow, self-consciousness emerges, that somehow I haven't given an answer to the origin question that you're looking for. So could you explain that?
Yeah. So first of all, I think to answer this question, we need to kind of take into account so many things. First of all, how machines work, and how, no matter how complicated they are not functioning outside of the parameter set up by programmers based on set of algorithms. So whatever that they are doing is exactly predeterministic, and whatever they are doing is deterministic in a sense that it is solely based on how the algorithm is set up to run the program that programmers have written. So to say that even if the machines are capable of doing what you've said, let's take free will for an instance. How are we going to justify that the machine has a free will? We need to show that the machine is an agent. Only agents have free will.
So it develops agency. It develops agency.
How is it possible for them to develop an agency? Let's say, for example, they can put the language of agency, the behaviors that agents do in algorithmic language. Still, what the machine is doing is what the machine is told to execute. It's not like the machine is taking any further step outside of that setup parameter. So my biggest problem is not to really be dogmatic, but I want to see a fresh, non-human involving process giving rise to whatever that they are saying. At that point, things would take completely a different turn. So far, there is nothing whatsoever along that line. Zero, none. So the complexity says nothing. The complexity has zero properties of human agency, whatever. But then algorithmic less, whatever, is not going to work in computer science. Because computer science, the program itself is based on algorithmic rules, coding rules. So this is the problem. So at the least, we can really push back and say, what you're doing is not going to work. Let's look at non-human interfering stuff, whether it works. Then that would, well, let's see. And that's where I'm actually going to go to Cambridge University in June to speak on artificial intelligence and the metaphysical limitations. And I'll be, speaking on a series of paradoxes that would ensue based on what this, specialists are telling us. It's just a little. If we only need few years. No. It has nothing to do with years. fundamentally at the most basic level, the starting point is mistaken. And it will always produce a wrong answer. You cannot get a correct answer by computing many falsehoods. And so that's my problem. But other than that, I'm open. I'm open, but I do not want to see human interference. Yep.
Can I just?
Go ahead, please. Yeah.
I wonder if this might capture what you're proposing. So just kind of a metaphor. Imagine you're watching a cartoon, and maybe we're kids. We're just watching this cartoon, and it's very realistic. It's so realistic that it sort of makes us think that the characters are conscious, right? But then what you're saying is that those pixels really aren't the right materials for actual consciousness and actual free will, even, because the pixels are moved by the laws of physics. So those aren't real agents. It's a category problem. Even if we're sort of tricked epistemologically, maybe we're even in our rights to think that a certain robot is conscious, given its behavior. But metaphysically, it's a category problem. That's the worry. I actually, so I might be a little more sympathetic to the possibility of getting conscious beings, but I think it's still going to push the problem back a step, because even if you think about the nature of the laws themselves that govern the machines, what's a law? It's interesting to me that a law has the same structure as a thought. If I talk about the law that massive objects move together in a particular way according to a certain equation, has the same structure as the thought that they move together in a certain way according to an equation. And it seems to make sense to me that even the laws themselves reflect a kind of mind-like structure. And so that really what's happening, if you get characters on a screen that are actually conscious, like those pixels are arranged in such a way that, in fact, that cartoon character is actually conscious, it's going to be because its consciousness is flowing from a deeper root that itself has a mind and is able to coordinate the laws of the pixels with the special first-person qualitative experiences together with agency. I sort of imagine it like if there's water flowing out of a rock, it's like you might be tempted to think that the water comes from the rock. But if you understand the nature of water and you understand the nature of rocks, then you see, there's kind of a category problem there, that there's probably something deeper going on. Or if you turn a light switch and a lamp glows, well, there's correlation. You might think the light is coming from the switch, but once you understand the nature of light and you understand the nature of the switch, you see, oh, okay, there's got to be more going on. And so my thought is that even if we did see these computers become actually conscious, and we had good reason to believe that they were conscious, that still wouldn't show that the consciousness is ultimately coming from mindless, unconscious materials. I think there would still be something deeper going on.
Hi, thank you guys for speaking. It's really interesting to hear all this stuff. I am not personally a student of philosophy. I have not taken many philosophy classes. I'm actually a film student.
Come on in.
But this kind of thing is a film student's bread and butter, because it's like, it's all the sci-fi movies you've ever seen. It's the MCU. It's Thanos theory. It's like, why? Because I've had the discussion with my friends before. Was Thanos actually right to say that he can fix this problem by eliminating half of the universe, and therefore we have more of this to go around? We have more resources. If we're talking about creating robots, right, I think it would be very smart of the human race to be a little selfish with them, as in to say, we're going to give you free reign over whatever you think, just like us, except we don't want you to come to the decision that we are actually the worst thing for this planet and we need to be taken care of. Because that is sci-fi, right? The robot thinks, okay, I don't feel pain. I don't really feel compassion for you. What is your use? And the way that I've seen humanity go is that we are evolving, but our brains devolving? I don't know if that's a word. Our brains going back, because, 100 years ago, if someone said, drink bleach, no one would say that. No one would do it. But now you have kids eating Tide Pods it's against survival. You know, we have gone down in saying like, okay, what am I going to do to survive? Instead, we're saying, screw it. I don't really care. A robot wouldn't do that. A robot would say, okay, I'm going to do everything I can to survive. And they have that in common with a zombie. They're going to do everything they can to eat and survive. And so a question posed a lot in film classes, especially pertaining to characters, is a character's fatal flaw. And if we're talking about our hero as humanity is the hero of the story. They have the power to feel compassion, to feel bad for someone else, to help someone. But their fatal flaw is that they can be so aggressive towards each other that they won't work together, whereas a race of robots, all thinking about how they can make themselves better, will unify themselves and say, we won't do anything different, we'll stay the same, and this is how we'll progress. But the human race won't do that. And so I guess my overarching question would be to you is, like, do you think that this is actually the road that humanity's taking, is that we do have this fatal flaw that's leading us down to this spiral?
I think you're pointing to the problem of agency, having free will, being able to make decisions. Take that out and you can get the robots along one path. So this is a further conversation in terms of the values that might spring in the context of agency and the kinds of stories and movies, dramas that can emerge. But I've often thought about the value of bringing philosophy ideas into film. So we'd love to see more of you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think there are some anxieties on the part of some people who are a bit skeptical of, who actually foresee the possible consequences of giving too much to the things that we are creating. And I think we should be a bit careful about what we do with these gadgets and the sort of algorithms that we write. And you can create a machine that runs after you and strangles you. And you can, so we are to be blamed. It's in our hands. Everything is in our hand. So I think it's a well-taken observation.
Thank you. And thank you guys for coming out. This is great. Appreciate it.